He rescued abandoned black kittens in alley. A love story unfolds 20 years later. The rain came down in relentless sheets, pounding against the windshield as Marcus gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white with tension. 20 years of questions were about to be answered. 20 years since he'd found those kittens in that rain-soaked alley off Maple Street. The radio crackled with an old Fleetwood Mac song as lightning illuminated the abandoned warehouse ahead, the address scrawled on the mysterious note that had appeared on his doorstep 3 days ago. "You don't have to do this," Elaine said from the passenger seat, her hand gently touching his arm. Her eyes, still vibrant at 62, held the same warmth they had when they first met. "Whatever happened back then, it doesn't change who you are now." Marcus shook his head, raindrops from his silver-streaked hair falling onto his worn denim jacket. "I need to know why they targeted me, why my name was in those files, and why after all these years someone's trying to connect it to those kittens." He reached into his pocket, fingers brushing against the faded Polaroid he'd kept all these years, 3 tiny black kittens huddled together, their eyes still barely open. The warehouse door creaked open, and a silhouette emerged from the darkness. Marcus squinted through the rain-streaked windshield. The figure stepped forward and his breath caught in his throat. He would recognize that face anywhere, older now, lined with years of hardship, but unmistakable. "That's impossible," he whispered. "She's supposed to be dead." 20 years earlier, Marcus Donovan hadn't been looking for trouble, or kittens for that matter. At 35, he'd been focused on rebuilding his life after the economic crash of '99 had wiped out his small construction business. The apartment he'd rented in the old West Side district of Millfield wasn't much, but it was a roof over his head while he worked double shifts at Harmon's Hardware. That rainy October evening, he'd been taking a shortcut home through the narrow alley behind Lee's Chinese restaurant when he heard it, a faint mewling barely audible above the patter of rain. Following the sound to a soggy cardboard box tucked behind a dumpster, Marcus discovered 3 tiny black kittens, eyes barely open, trembling from cold and hunger. "Who would do this to you?" he murmured, shielding the box with his jacket. He didn't know the first thing about caring for kittens, especially ones this young. His ex-wife had been allergic to cats, and after the divorce 5 years earlier, he'd thrown himself into work rather than consider pets. The kittens looked up at him with brilliant blue eyes, their tiny bodies soaked and shivering. One of them, slightly larger than the others, let out a determined squeak that seemed to say, "Well, what are you waiting for?" Marcus laughed despite himself. "All right, little ones, let's get you somewhere warm." Taking the box of kittens to his apartment, Marcus made a hasty nest of towels in a laundry basket and placed it near the radiator. A quick call to the emergency vet revealed they needed kitten formula, which sent him rushing to the 24-hour convenience store 3 blocks away. "Kittens, huh?" Mrs. Wilson, the elderly cashier with cat-eye glasses and a beehive hairstyle that hadn't changed since 1975, rang up the makeshift supplies. "You don't strike me as a cat person, Marcus." "I'm not," he admitted, counting out crumpled bills. "Someone left them in an alley to die." Mrs. Wilson's lips tightened into a disapproving line. "Black cats, too. Some people are still superstitious about them, especially in this town with all its history." She bagged his purchases with careful hands. "You're doing a good thing, not many would stop." By the time Marcus returned home, the smallest kitten had grown alarmingly still. Panicking, he wrapped it in a warm towel and massaged its tiny body, willing life back into the fragile form. "Come on, little one," he whispered, a lump forming in his throat. After what seemed like an eternity, the kitten gave a weak mew and began to move. Relief washed over him like a wave. "That's it," he encouraged, carefully feeding each kitten with the eyedropper as the vet had instructed over the phone. "You 3 are fighters, aren't you?" The weeks that followed transformed Marcus's sparse apartment and solitary routine. The kittens, whom he'd named Shadow, Midnight, and Onyx, required round-the-clock care. He rigged up a feeding schedule on his refrigerator with magnets and took to carrying the kittens to work in a specially padded box, feeding them during breaks. "Never figured you for a cat lady, Donovan," teased Frank, his supervisor at Harmon's, as Marcus warmed formula in the break room microwave. "Temporary situation," Marcus insisted, though the way he gently stroked Shadow's head suggested otherwise. "Just until they're old enough to find homes." But finding homes for 3 black kittens in Millfield proved more difficult than expected. The town had a strange relationship with superstition, the legacy of events from the 1950s that locals referred to only as the incidents. When Marcus mentioned the kittens to potential adopters, he often received uneasy glances or awkward excuses. It was during one such disappointing encounter at the local farmer's market, where he'd set up a small Kittens Need Homes display, that he first met Corinne Davis. Tall and poised, with warm brown skin and hair styled in neat locks, she approached his table with purpose rather than the hesitant curiosity of other visitors. "Black kittens," she observed, her voice rich and measured. She wore a pressed pantsuit despite the casual setting, and a press badge identified her as a reporter for the Millfield Gazette. "Mind if I take a photo for the paper?" Marcus gestured toward the carrier where the kittens were playfully tumbling over each other. "Be my guest, though I doubt it'll help. 17 people have stopped by, and all 17 suddenly remembered prior commitments when they saw what color the kittens are." Corinne's camera lowered slightly. "Millfield and its shadows," she murmured, before raising it again to snap several photos. "The town that can't escape its past." She met Marcus's confused expression with a small smile. "I'm working on a series about how Millfield's history of racial tension still affects community behavior today. These little ones might fit right into my narrative." "They're just kittens," Marcus said defensively. "Nothing is just anything in this town," Corinne replied, but her expression softened as she reached down to let Midnight sniff her finger. "But they are adorable. Have you had any luck with the shelters?" Marcus shook his head. "Full up. Plus, black cats have the lowest adoption rates and highest euthanasia rates. I can't risk it." "So you're keeping them?" The question caught him off guard. He'd been so focused on finding them homes that he hadn't considered the alternative. I don't know. My place is small. I work long hours." "But you've managed so far," Corinne observed, watching as Shadow climbed onto Marcus's shoulder with practiced ease. "They seem attached to you." Before Marcus could respond, a commotion erupted several stalls down. A man in his 70s had knocked over a display of jams, sending glass jars shattering across the pavement. The man's face was flushed with anger as he shouted at the vendor. "You know the rules. Nothing black allowed at these markets. It's been that way since my father's time." The vendor, a young woman with a sleeve of colorful tattoos, stood her ground. "They're blackberry preserves, Mr. Hargrove. It's just fruit." "It starts with fruit, then cats, then who knows what." The old man blustered, pointing a gnarled finger at Marcus's stall. "Like him over there with those devil creatures." Corinne was already moving, camera raised, but Marcus reached out to stop her. "Don't," he warned. "That's Emmett Hargrove. His family practically owns this town." "All the more reason," Corinne replied, shaking off his hand. "The Gazette isn't owned by local interests anymore, and sunlight is the best disinfectant." Marcus watched as she approached the scene, introducing herself and asking pointed questions that quickly had Hargrove backpedaling. The old man's gaze shifted to Marcus, narrowing with unmistakable hostility before he stormed away, muttering about outsiders and traditions. The following day, Marcus found his apartment door vandalized with a crude drawing of 3 black cats crossed out in red paint. The message was clear, but it had the opposite effect than intended. That evening, he brought home 3 small ceramic bowls and a cat tower he'd splurged on with his overtime pay. "Looks like you're stuck with me," he told the kittens as they enthusiastically explored their new toy. "We outsiders have to stick together." The Millfield Gazette's Sunday edition featured Corinne's piece prominently. "Old superstitions die hard, Millfield's ongoing battle with its shadows." The article juxtaposed the farmers' market incident with historical accounts of the town's troubled past, including a sidebar about black cat superstitions and their historical connection to racial prejudice. Marcus was mentioned briefly as a local man facing community resistance while trying to find homes for rescued black kittens. The phone rang shortly after 9 that morning. Marcus answered, expecting another anonymous threat like the 3 he'd already received since the article appeared. "Mr. Donovan, this is Corinne Davis from the Gazette." Her voice was tense. "Have you seen today's paper?" "I was just reading it," he replied, glancing at the spread on his kitchen table. "Nice work, though I doubt it'll change any minds around here." "That's not why I'm calling. Check page 6, bottom corner, the town notices." Frowning, Marcus flipped to the indicated page and scanned the small print until he found it. A notice about an upcoming town council vote on Ordinance 41B, prohibiting the keeping of animals of ill omen within city limits, including but not limited to corvids, black felines, and certain reptiles. The measure was sponsored by Councilman Richard Hargrove, Emmett's son. "They can't be serious," Marcus said, disbelief evident in his voice. "This is the 21st century." "Millfield exists in its own time bubble," Corinne replied grimly. "The Hargroves have been pushing versions of this ordinance since 1953. It's never passed before, but with the recent vandalism incidents and the council's current makeup." She paused. "Look, I'm working on a follow-up story. Would you be willing to go on record? Put a human face to those affected by these outdated beliefs?" Marcus hesitated, watching as the kittens chased each other across his living room rug. He was a private person by nature, and drawing more attention to himself seemed unwise given the hostility he'd already encountered. But the alternative's silent compliance with absurdity sat even worse. "What do you need from me?" he asked finally. The interview took place at Marcus's apartment the following afternoon. Corinne arrived with a photographer, a quiet young man named Terrence who spent most of the session crawling on the floor to capture the kittens at their most playful. The questions were straightforward, focusing on how Marcus had found the kittens and the difficulties he'd faced trying to find them homes. "And you've decided to keep them?" Corinne asked, her recorder capturing every word. Marcus nodded, watching as Onyx batted at a dangling toy. "I never planned to have pets, but sometimes life has other ideas. They needed help, I could give it, simple as that." "Not everyone sees it that way," Corinne prompted. "Their problem, not mine." Marcus shrugged, but then sighed. "Look, I grew up in Riverdale, moved here 15 years ago for work. I've always known Millfield had its quirks, but this level of superstition in this day and age, it's ridiculous. They're cats, not omens." The resulting article appeared midweek. "Local man challenges town's feline phobia." It featured a photo of Marcus surrounded by his 3 black kittens, looking both defiant and slightly uncomfortable with the attention. The piece detailed the rescue story and included quotes from a veterinarian and a historian discussing the origins of black cat superstitions. The council meeting was scheduled for the following Monday evening. In the days leading up to it, Marcus received dozens of calls and letters, some supportive, others threatening. Neighbors who had previously been cordial now crossed the street to avoid him. But for every negative reaction, there seemed to be someone else quietly offering encouragement. Mrs. Wilson from the convenience store slipped him a card with a $50 gift certificate for pet supplies. "My Harold had a black cat for 18 years, she confided. "Luckiest years of his life." Frank from the hardware store adjusted Marcus's schedule so he could attend the council meeting. "Stand your ground," he advised gruffly. "This town needs to be dragged into this century." The council chambers were packed that Monday evening. Marcus sat near the back, trying to ignore the stares and whispers. Corinne nodded to him from the press section, her notebook already open. The atmosphere grew tense as Richard Hargrove presented Ordinance 41B, his rhetoric a polished version of his father's farmer's market rant, dressed up in concerns about community standards and historical precedent. Several elderly residents spoke in favor of the measure, citing incidents from decades past that supposedly proved the danger of harboring ill omens. When the time came for opposition statements, Marcus was surprised by the number of people who approached the microphone. A young veterinarian presented statistics on black cat adoption rates. The owner of a local bookstore read a list of cultures where black cats were considered lucky. A retired history teacher connected the town's superstitions to its uncomfortable racial past. Finally, it was Marcus's turn. He hadn't prepared remarks, trusting his simple truth would be enough. As he approached the podium, he became acutely aware of the council members watching him most with neutral expressions, but Richard Hargrove's face was set in unmistakable hostility. "My name is Marcus Donovan," he began, his voice steady despite his nerves. "I found 3 kittens abandoned in an alley. They were dying. I helped them live. That's the entire story. They're not symbols or omens, they're living creatures who needed help." He looked around the room, meeting as many eyes as he could. "I've lived in Millfield for 15 years. I've obeyed its laws, paid its taxes, and respected its customs. But I won't pretend to believe something I know isn't true. These cats aren't bad luck." The only bad luck in this situation was theirs, being born black in a town that's still afraid of shadows. The room erupted in a mixture of applause and outraged murmurs. Marcus returned to his seat, heart pounding. The council moved to a vote, and in a surprising turn, Ordinance 41B was defeated 4-3, with the deciding vote cast by Councilwoman Eleanor Jenkins, who had been silent throughout the proceedings. "Sometimes," she stated simply, "we must choose whether to be ruled by fear or by compassion. I choose the latter." Outside the council chambers, a light rain had begun to fall. Marcus stood under the building's overhang, processing the evening's events when Corinne approached, sheltered beneath a large black umbrella. "Congratulations," she said, offering him space beneath the umbrella. "That was quite a speech for someone who claims to be not good with words." Marcus smiled tiredly. "Just told the truth. Doesn't always work, but it's all I had." "It was enough." She studied him thoughtfully. "You know this isn't over, don't you? The Hargroves don't take defeat well." "Let them come," Marcus replied, surprising himself with his own conviction. "Some things are worth fighting for." They walked together in comfortable silence, the rain creating a private world beneath the umbrella. At the corner where they would need to part ways, Corinne hesitated. The series I'm working on about Millfield's shadows, it goes deeper than superstitions and old prejudices. There are documents, records from the 1950s that certain people would prefer stay buried. What happened tonight, it's connected. To cats, Marcus asked, skeptical. To resistance, Corinne corrected. To refusing to participate in collective delusion. She handed him a business card. If you notice anything strange or if anyone approaches you about the incidents, call me. Day or night? Before Marcus could question her further, she continued down the street, her umbrella disappearing into the misty rain. The months that followed brought an uneasy peace. Shadow, Midnight, and Onyx grew into handsome adult cats with sleek black coats and vibrant personalities. Marcus settled into the rhythms of cat ownership, finding unexpected comfort in their presence after long workdays. He saw Corinne occasionally professional encounters as she continued her investigative series, each article digging deeper into Millfield's troubled history. They developed a cautious friendship, meeting for coffee to discuss her findings or simply to enjoy each other's company. There was a connection between them, unspoken but growing, complicated by professional boundaries and personal hesitations. Spring arrived, bringing with it a sense of renewal. The town's attention had shifted to other matters, and Marcus began to hope the entire black cat controversy had been forgotten. Then, on a warm April evening, he returned home to find his apartment door ajar. Heart racing, he pushed it open slowly. Nothing seemed disturbed in the living room, but the cats were nowhere to be seen unusual, as they typically greeted him at the door. Calling their names, he moved through the apartment with growing dread until he reached the bedroom. The window was open, curtains billowing in the breeze. On the bed lay a manila envelope and a Polaroid photograph of his 3 cats, huddled together much as they had been when he first found them. Scrawled across the photo in red marker were the words, "The incidents require balance, a life for a life." Frantic, Marcus searched the apartment and surrounding neighborhood for hours, calling until his voice grew hoarse. There was no sign of the cats. When he finally returned home, exhausted and heartsick, he opened the manila envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a photocopy of what appeared to be an official report dated October 12, 1953. Most of the text was redacted with thick black lines, but a few phrases stood out. 3 witnesses refused to recant, and necessary measures taken. At the bottom, partially obscured but still legible, was a list of names. The 3rd name had been circled in the same red marker, Marcus Donovan S.R., his grandfather's name. The phone was in his hand before he consciously decided to make the call. Corinne answered on the 2nd ring. "They took my cats," Marcus said without preamble, his voice raw, "and they left something, a document with my grandfather's name on it, from 1953. Corinne's sharp intake of breath was audible. "Don't move, don't call anyone else. I'll be there in 20 minutes. The document, as Corinne explained after examining it, appeared to be part of the sealed records she'd been trying to access for months, records of the town council's secret proceedings during what locals euphemistically called the incidents. In 1953, Millfield experienced a series of events that the official history calls civil disturbances, she explained, carefully placing the photocopy in a plastic sleeve. What actually happened was a coordinated effort to drive out the black families who had settled in the West Side after the war. The Hargrove family led the charge, using everything from economic pressure to actual violence. Marcus sat heavily on his couch, still numb with worry for his missing cats. "What does this have to do with my grandfather or my cats?" "Your grandfather was one of 3 white business owners who testified against the Hargroves," Corinne said gently. "They owned a small grocery store on the West Side. When the Hargroves organized a boycott of black-owned businesses, your grandparents continued to serve everyone. Later, when violence broke out, they sheltered several families in their store." Marcus shook his head in confusion. "I never knew any of this. My father never spoke about his parents much. They died before I was born." "They didn't just die," Corinne said carefully. "According to my research, they were killed in what was ruled an accidental fire in 1954. The other 2 witnesses suffered similar accidents." The implications settled over Marcus like a physical weight. "So this is, what? Revenge for something that happened before I was even born." "The Hargroves have long memories," Corinne replied, "and they've controlled this town's narrative for generations. My articles are the first time anyone has publicly challenged their version of history." She glanced at the threatening note. The black cats were just a convenient symbol and excuse. When you stood up at that council meeting, you became more than just a man with pets. You became a reminder of your grandfather's defiance. Marcus stood abruptly, pacing the small living room. I don't care about old grudges or town history right now. I need to find my cats. Corinne nodded, understanding. Let me help. This is bigger than just your pets now. This is evidence of ongoing intimidation connected to historical crimes. We can go to the county sheriff, bypass local authorities entirely. They filed a report with the county sheriff's office that night, presenting the note and document as evidence. The deputy seemed skeptical, but took their statements seriously enough to promise increased patrols in the area. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Days passed with no sign of the cats and no response from the sheriff's office. Marcus took time off work to search, posting flyers and following up on every possible lead. Corinne used her connections at the Gazette to publish a prominent story about the theft, carefully avoiding direct accusations while making sure readers understood the context. A week after the cat's disappearance, Marcus received an anonymous phone call. A distorted voice provided an address and abandoned property on the outskirts of town once owned by the Hargrove family, and the simple message, "Tonight at midnight, come alone or don't find them." It's obviously a trap, Corinne insisted when Marcus called her. We need to take this to the sheriff. And say what, that I got an anonymous tip. They barely took us seriously before, Marcus argued. These people took my cats to send a message. I need to show them I received it. At least let me come with you, Corinne pleaded. The caller said come alone. Then I'll follow separately. Please, Marcus, this isn't just about cats anymore. The abandoned Hargrove property was a decaying Victorian house set back from the road, surrounded by overgrown gardens and a rusted iron fence. Marcus arrived at 11:45, parking his truck at the end of the long gravel driveway. The night was clear, a half-moon providing just enough light to navigate the weed-choked path to the house. The front door stood ajar, a faint light flickering from within. Taking a deep breath, Marcus stepped inside. The entryway opened into what had once been a grand foyer, now stripped of everything but dust and shadows. At its center stood a small table with a candle, next to which was a familiar manila envelope. "Hello," Marcus called, his voice echoing. "I'm here about my cats." No response came except the creaking of the old house settling. Approaching the table cautiously, Marcus examined the envelope without touching it. It appeared identical to the one left in his apartment. A soft mewling sound from the second floor shattered the silence. Without hesitation, Marcus took the candle and moved toward the staircase, its once fine wood now rotting and treacherous. He climbed carefully, following the sounds to a door at the end of the hallway. Inside, he found a room empty except for a cat carrier in the center of the floor. Relief flooded through him as he recognized his 3 cats, apparently unharmed though clearly distressed. As he knelt to open the carrier, a floorboard creaked behind him. "Your grandfather made the same mistake," said a voice from the shadows, "caring too much about the wrong things." Marcus turned slowly to find Emmett Hargrove emerging from a darkened corner, supported by an ornate cane. Despite his age, the old man's eyes were sharp with malice. "My cats have nothing to do with whatever grievance you think you have against my family," Marcus said evenly, standing to face the man. "Everything is connected in Millfield," Hargrove replied. "Surely the reporter woman has told you that by now. Your grandfather betrayed this town's traditions. My son tries to uphold them, and you publicly humiliate him. Now that woman is digging up things best left buried." He tapped his cane against the floor for emphasis. "Balance must be restored." "By stealing pets, by threatening an innocent person." Marcus kept his voice calm despite the anger churning within him. "Those traditions you're so proud of, they're built on prejudice and fear. My grandfather understood that. So do I." The old man's face contorted with rage. "You know nothing. This town prospered under our guidance. We kept the natural order." He moved closer, his cane raised slightly. "Your grandfather's interference brought nothing but chaos. We restored balance then, and we'll do it again now." A new voice joined the confrontation. "By balance, do you mean 3 suspicious fires in 1954? 3 witnesses silenced permanently?" Corinne stood in the doorway, recording device visible in her hand. Beside her was a uniformed county sheriff's deputy. Hargrove's expression faltered momentarily before hardening again. "You have no proof of anything, and you're trespassing on private property." "Actually," the deputy interjected, "this property was seized by the county for tax delinquency 5 years ago. You're the one trespassing, Mr. Hargrove, along with kidnapping pets and making threats." He nodded toward the cat carrier. "Mr. Donovan, please collect your animals while I have a word with Mr. Hargrove." Outside, as Marcus carefully placed the carrier in his truck, Corinne explained how she'd contacted the sheriff with her suspicions and evidence from previous research. "When you told me about the call, I knew we needed backup," she said. "The deputy was already watching the property based on our previous report." "Thank you," Marcus said, the simple words inadequate for his gratitude. "I should have listened to you from the start." "Partners listen to each other," Corinne replied with a small smile, "even when they disagree." The word partners lingered between them, full of possibility. In the weeks that followed, Emmett Hargrove's threats led to multiple charges, and Corinne's investigation gained new momentum as witnesses, emboldened by the developments, came forward with their stories. The Gazette published a special edition dedicated to the true incidents of 1953, featuring personal accounts, historical documents, and expert analysis. The Hargrove family's influence over Millfield began to wane as long-buried truths emerged. Richard Hargrove resigned from the town council after connections to ongoing intimidation tactics were revealed. The town itself seemed to exhale collectively, as if freed from a long-held breath. For Marcus, life took an unexpected turn. His grandfather's courage, once unknown to him, became a source of pride and inspiration. The small grocery store site, long abandoned, was purchased by a community trust with plans to establish a historical marker and community center. And then there was Corinne. Their partnership evolved naturally, professional respect blossoming into deeper affection. The cats, seemingly unscathed by their ordeal, adopted her as readily as they had Marcus, creating a family none of them had anticipated. 1 year after the council meeting that had started it all, Marcus and Corinne sat on the porch of their newly shared home, watching as Shadow, Midnight, and Onyx prowled the garden in the fading evening light. "Sometimes I wonder," Marcus mused, "what would have happened if I hadn't taken that alley shortcut that night, if I hadn't heard them crying." Corinne leaned against him, her warmth comfortable and familiar. "Some things are meant to find us, I think. Your grandfather's courage, those kittens, the truth about this town." She looked up at him with a smile. "Me," Marcus nodded, understanding. "All those years, I thought I was just going through life, head down, minding my own business. Turns out I was actually walking a path that started long before me. And continues beyond you," Corinne added, placing his hand over her stomach where their child, just beginning to show, grew steadily stronger. "Full circle." In the garden, the 3 black cats paused in their exploration, turning to look at the couple on the porch with knowing golden eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of generations, past, present, and future, all connected by invisible threads of courage, truth, and love. 20 years later, Marcus stood before the warehouse door, the rain still pounding around him. Elaine squeezed his hand reassuringly, her presence a steadying force as it had been since they married 18 years ago. "Remember what Mom always said," she murmured. "Some things are meant to find us." Corinne's words, now carried by their daughter. Marcus nodded, drawing strength from the memory of his late wife, who had succumbed to cancer 5 years earlier but whose investigative spirit lived on in their journalism student daughter. The warehouse door opened wider and the figure stepped fully into the light. An elderly woman, her face lined but her posture still proud, regarded them with wary interest. "Margaret Donovan?" she asked, her voice carrying clearly despite the rain. "No," Marcus replied. "I'm Marcus Donovan. Margaret is my daughter." He gestured to Elaine. "This is my second wife, Elaine." The woman's expression shifted to one of surprise, then understanding. "You're the grandson, the one who found the cats." She stepped back, gesturing them inside. "I've waited a long time to meet you. I'm Clara Wilson. I knew your grandparents." Inside, the warehouse was not abandoned at all, but renovated into a living archive. Walls lined with photographs, documents, and news clippings told the story of Millfield's transformation. At the center, in a place of honor, hung a framed newspaper article featuring a younger Marcus surrounded by 3 black kittens. "Your wife's work changed everything," Clara explained, moving among the displays with the confidence of a curator. "After the truth came out, those of us who remembered wanted to make sure it was never forgotten again." "But why contact me now?" Marcus asked. "And why all the secrecy?" Clara's expression grew somber. "Because history has a way of repeating itself. There's a new ordinance being quietly developed, not about cats this time, but about community standards that would effectively segregate housing again." She handed him a folder of documents. "We need someone with your family's credibility to help us stop it before it gains momentum." Marcus opened the folder, scanning the contents with growing concern. "I'm not a journalist like Corinne was or an activist. You stood up when it mattered before," Clara said simply. "Sometimes that's all it takes to inspire others." Elaine, who had been examining the displays, called out from across the room. "Marcus, you need to see this." She stood before a collection of photographs, people Marcus had never seen before, standing in front of a small grocery store. In the center were a young couple, the man bearing a striking resemblance to Marcus himself. "Your grandparents," Clara confirmed, joining them. On the day they opened their store. They believed business could be a force for good, bringing people together across artificial divides. Marcus stared at the faces of the grandparents he'd never known, feeling a connection that transcended time. "The kittens in the alley," he said softly. "They weren't an accident, were they?" Clara smiled enigmatically. "Your grandfather had a black cat named Lucky that went everywhere with him. After your grandparents died, some said they saw Lucky around town for years, despite being well past a normal cat's lifespan." She shrugged. "Superstition works both ways, you know. Some believe Lucky's descendants have been watching over your family ever since." Marcus thought of Shadow, Midnight, and Onyx, who had lived remarkably long lives, each passing peacefully in their late teens. He thought of the stray black kitten that had appeared on their doorstep the day after Corinne's funeral, now contentedly living with his daughter at college. "I don't know if I believe in that kind of thing," he said finally. "Belief isn't always necessary for truth to work its way through the world," Clara replied. "Your grandfather didn't set out to be a hero. He just refused to look away when others did, like grandfather, like grandson." She gestured to the folder in his hands. "And now perhaps like granddaughter?" Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the world washed clean and new. As Marcus and Elaine drove home, the folder of documents between them, a black cat crossed their path, pausing to look directly at them before disappearing into the shadows. Elaine laughed softly. "Corinne would say that was a sign." Marcus smiled, feeling the weight of the past and the possibility of the future in equal measure. "Maybe it is. Or maybe it's just a cat, doing what cats do, reminding us to pay attention to the things others miss." He thought of his daughter, who would be home from college next week, and the conversations they would have about Clara's documents. He thought of the town that had changed and the parts that remained stubbornly the same. And he thought of 3 tiny kittens in a rain-soaked alley, their unlikely rescue setting in motion a story that continued to unfold across generations. "Either way," he said, "I'm listening." Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories like this one. We bring you new content every week that celebrates the unexpected connections that shape our lives.